Iran in the nuclear hot seat, as just minutes ago the UN Security Council voted in favour of a new round of sanctions. From New York to Islamabad, we look at what happens now. Well, it's a day of reckoning for Iran, with its nuclear program in the spotlight. After months of negotiations, the United Nations Security Council has just approved a new round of sanctions against the Islamic Republic. Well, through the prism this hour, we're going to examine the implications and the different points of view for you. Matthew Chance will discuss the IAEA perspective. Richard Roth is at UN headquarters in New York for the story from there, and Reza Sayah is monitoring Iranian and regional reaction for us. Let's go first to Richard and get the vote here, Richard, and also just how stringent are these sanctions?
Well, the U.S. thinks these sanctions are quite punishing. There are additional sanctions added to 3 other rounds of sanctions passed since 2006. The vote was 12 in favor, 2 opposed, and 1 abstention. Now, the United States call these broad-based sanctions that will harm Iran, some of its personnel involved with the technology, ballistic missile field. Cargo ships can be stopped if countries believe there's reasonable concern that they are carrying contraband. There's a range of sanctions, but there are still areas where Iran will avoid perhaps real punishment. Susan Rice, the U.S. ambassador, says that Iran does have rights, but also responsibilities.
As President Obama has said, rules must be binding. Violations must be punished. Words must mean something. The issue is straightforward. We are at this point because the government of Iran has chosen clearly and willfully to violate its commitments to the IAEA and the resolutions of this council.
Brazil and Turkey do not have veto power. They were unable to block this resolution. They fought against it behind closed doors, and publicly the Turkish ambassador and the Brazilian ambassador expressed their desire that sanctions is not the way to go forward.
We are firmly convinced that the only possible way to achieve this collective goal is to secure Iran's cooperation through effective and action-oriented dialogue and negotiations. The Tehran Declaration showed that dialogue and persuasion can do more than punitive actions. Its purpose and result were to build the confidence needed to address a whole set of aspects of Iran's nuclear program.
Brazil and Turkey feel much more attention should be paid to the nuclear fuel exchange deal worked out with Tehran, something the United States, Britain, and France took note of but don't believe is substantive enough, though those countries say it could be a confidence-building measure in the future. Stan, back to you.
Richard, what was it that got China and Russia to sign on to this when they've been so reluctant to in the past?
Okay, good.
Well, China and Russia signed on to this because the United States has done different deals with Russia regarding missile basing in Eastern Europe, and you never know what's going on behind the scenes. But China was able to water down the resolution to eliminate perhaps some people who China thought might affect the functioning of Iranian society or take it out on the Iranian people, and it leaves open the energy field where China has interests. It's big power politics played out behind the scenes on Iran, and now the world waits to see whether Iran will come back to the negotiating table.
That is the key question. Richard, thank you very much for that. We're going to go to senior international correspondent Matthew Chance live from Jerusalem to talk about what this means for the UN's nuclear watchdog group. And of course, Turkey and Brazil upset here because they thought they had a deal with Iran. What was wrong with that deal?
Well, the deal really is too little, too late. It was offered well after a similar deal had already been brokered by the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, essentially to basically export, for Iran to export much of its low-enriched uranium that it spent years manufacturing against United Nations Security Council resolutions, to take it out of the country and essentially to swap it for nuclear fuel to fuel its research reactor that needs fuel for medical purposes. To create medical isotopes and things like that in the Iranian capital, Tehran. You know, the IAEA says that deal is still on the table. these UN sanctions, this new latest round of sanctions at the Security Council, isn't going to change what the UN's nuclear watchdog wants, which is greater access to Iran's nuclear activities, to the various sites that it's set up around the country, and greater, kind of clarity in the questions that it needs answered from Iranian nuclear officials. And so I haven't spoken to the IAEA today, but I expect they will be attempting to continue their work, trying to get as much access as possible, as many answers as possible from the Iranians about the question marks still hanging over their nuclear program, Stan.
Matthew, of course, you're in Jerusalem. Israel, more than just a bystander here. What's the reaction there? Anything so far?
No, they haven't reacted officially. They're saying they're going to wait for other countries to react first before they issue their formal reaction. But I've been speaking to Israeli officials, and they've said that they obviously they support sanctions. Obviously, they support the resolution. They see it as a sign of unity in the world against Iran's nuclear program. They see it as very symbolic. But what they also make clear is that they don't regard the kinds of sanctions that the Security Council have set out as sufficient to stop Iran from producing a nuclear weapon. They say they want to see much tougher sanctions with teeth, they say, that target Iran's energy sector, because that's where Iran gets its money from. That is the only sector, according to the Israelis, that Iran would really feel pain for if it was targeted by sanctions. And so what Israel says it will do now is, with these sanctions now passed, this resolution now passed at the Security Council, it will be pushing for other countries like the United States, like the European countries in the European Union and others concerned about the possibility that Iran could be developing a nuclear weapon, to introduce more sanctions that would target the energy sector. And so that's what they're going to be working on diplomatically.
Matthew, thank you for that. Matthew Chance joining us there. Reza Sayar is monitoring reaction out of Tehran and the region. He's going to join us now live from CNN Islamabad. Reza, Matthew raised this question then that the Israelis are also asking, are these sanctions going to be tough enough to stop the nuclear program?
Well, it's the U.S.'s position that these sanctions are going to be different from the prior three, that they are tough. And these are sanctions that are tailored to target Iran's nuclear program, Iran's banks, the Revolutionary Guard, which oversees much of Iran's nuclear program. But if you look at the past three rounds of sanctions, they haven't been successful in getting Iran to stop enriching uranium, which is the ultimate goal, after all, for Washington and Western powers. Again, it's the U.S.'s position that these will be different. Now, we've been calling Tehran for reaction, no official reaction yet, but we got a taste of the reaction even before this vote went down from Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and Iran's representative to the IAEA. Both of those men saying these sanctions, these fourth round of sanctions, are a grave mistake, and Iran will not give up its rights to enrich uranium. President Ahmadinejad's warning, in fact, that if these sanctions are passed, and indeed they were, there will be no more dialogue, no more talks when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. And critics of these sanctions say that could be a setback for Washington and Western powers, Stan, because the closest the UN Security Council has gotten to getting Iran to budge on its nuclear program is through dialogue, not sanctions, Stan.
But where does Iran turn to in terms of its own friends here? Obviously, Turkey and Brazil, who'd brokered that arrangement, but it had relied on China and Russia in the past. Has it lost that?
Well, it hasn't completely lost that. Remember, the toughest set of sanctions would be sanctions that would target gas imports to Iran. And many analysts believe that it was because of the reluctance of China and Russia, both significant trade partners to Iran, that the targeting gas imports did not happen. But indeed, they were on board with these fourth round of sanctions. And I think what's key moving forward is if dialogue, some form of dialogue is going to continue. As we reported before, President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has said no dialogue will take place now that these fourth round of sanctions have taken place. If indeed that's true, look for this stalemate to continue. Look for Iran to continue enriching uranium and making progress with its nuclear program. But if that's not the case, if there is some form of dialogue, there is at least some hope for confidence-building measures like a nuclear swap deal that's still on the table, the agreement signed between Iran, Turkey, and Brazil, Stan.
Reza, thank you. Reza Sayar live there from Islamabad, monitoring reaction from Iran and the region.